Team. The last thing Sergeant Mirakovis remembered before the signal hit was the smell of rain on hot tarmac and the sound of her daughter laughing somewhere behind her in the market square. Then the world went sideways. It wasn't pain exactly. It was more like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known was there. A slow grinding sensation behind her sternum, and then a feeling she could only describe later as the withdrawal of something. That warm, like the tide pulling back, like a room after everyone has left it. She sat down on a crate in the middle of the checkpoint and couldn't get back up for 11 minutes. Soldiers she'd been training, kids most of them 18 and 19 and barely shaving, stood around her with their rifles at port arms and their faces trying very hard not to show that they scared. That was 6 weeks ago. Now she stood in what remained of Relay Station Keswick, a calm facility half buried in the granite hills above the last functional human settlement on Duran's moon, and she was trying very hard not to notice that her hands had started shaking again. "It's the Vorath signal," said Coates. He was leaning over the console behind her, his fingers working through the sensor logs with the particular unhurried precision that had made him invaluable across 4 postings and 1 court-martial that they never talked about. Warrant Officer Dallin Coates, 43 years old, built like a man who had grown up doing hard things and had simply never stopped. He had a gift for saying terrible things in the tone of someone reading a weather report. "The Vorath signal," Mira said. "You're certain? Amplitude, modulation, subharmonic carrier frequency. It matches the profile from the Kessler colony incident. Matches the Meridian station data. Matches what the Covenant analysts published after Tarthos IV. He paused. "It matches, Sarge." She turned away from the window and looked at him. He met her eyes steadily. The hills were the color of old rust, and somewhere out in that rust, a Vorath emitter was broadcasting at a frequency that human neurology wasn't designed to resist. "How long has it been active?" "Best estimate 3 weeks, maybe a little longer." 3 weeks. She counted back through the past month and saw the shape of it. The arguments that had started for no reason, the grief that had arrived without cause, the morning she'd stood in her bunk for 40 minutes unable to remember why she was supposed to get up. She'd written it off as the moon, as the posting picture, as the slow particular grind of a campaign that had been losing for long enough that losing started to feel like the natural order of things. The Vorath knew what they were doing. They'd had 800 years to learn it. "Where's Kyla?" she asked. Coates didn't answer immediately, which was its own kind of answer. Mira found the girl in the lower level in the storage bay that had been converted into something between a bunk room and a common space. She was 17, dark-eyed, the daughter of the settlement's water systems engineer, and she had been attached to Relay Station Keswick as a civilian auxiliary for 6 weeks, mostly because her father worked double shifts and the relay station was the safest place on the moon. She was sitting on a crate with her knees pulled to her chest, staring at the wall. "Hey," Mira said. Kyla didn't look up. "My parents are fighting again." "I know. They've been fighting for 3 weeks." She said it without heat, without tears, in the flat, affectless tone of someone who has run out of both. "My dad says it's the pressure of the posting. My mom says it's him. They both think I can't hear them." She paused. "I can always hear them." Mira sat down on the crate beside her. Storage bay smelled of machine oil and recycled air, and the particular cold that granite walls hold even in summer. "You know what the Vorath signal does," Mira said. "I know what the briefings say it does. It's not abstract, Kyla. It's a frequency. Specific engineered frequency that the Vorath developed to target the part of the human system that processes meaning. Not pain. Not fear exactly, just the sense that things matter, that anything you do connects to anything else." She paused. "It's like cutting the wire between what you know and what you feel." For the first time, Kyla looked at her. But why doesn't knowing that help? It was the right question. It was the question that Mira had been sitting with for 3 weeks and had not yet found a clean answer for, because the honest answer was that it didn't help the way you wanted it to. Signal didn't work by convincing you of false things. It worked by making true things feel unreachable, that you could recite every correct fact about your life, the people who loved you, the reasons to continue, the record of every time things had been hard and then gotten better, and the signal would let you recite them all and simply take away the sensation of their weight. "Knowing doesn't help all the way," Mira said, "but it helps some. Sometimes some is enough to act on." She didn't say, "I haven't been sleeping." He didn't say, "I've been sitting in the sensor bay at Aero 300 going through my service record like a man counting his money after a robbery, trying to verify that it's still there." He didn't say, "I know what real looks like. I've built enough of it over enough years that I can hold the memory of it against this signal like a compass against a magnet and feel which way is north." He said, "The signal is in this building, Kyla. There's an emitter somewhere in the lower structure. That's why you feel it the worst down here." Kyla was quiet for a moment. Then, can you stop it? The plan. What she didn't say was, I don't know if I can. What she didn't say was, I went to the console this morning and stood there for 20 minutes and couldn't bring myself to start the diagnostic, because somewhere in the last 3 weeks the signal, had gotten its hooks into the part of me that starts things, and every time I reached for a first step the signal whispered that the steps weren't real, that the ground wasn't solid, that I was the kind of person who starts things and doesn't finish them, who tries and fails, who has good instincts and bad follow-through, she'd gone and made coffee instead. Then she'd made more coffee. Then Coates had come in and handed her a data chip and said, sensor logs in the same tone he used for everything, and that had been enough. Some is enough to act on. The Vorith emitter was in the basement. Of course it was. Mira had done subterranean clearance on 3 different moons over the course of her career, and she had developed a clear and specific animosity toward basements, sublevels, access crawls, main tunnels, and anything else that required you to move through spaces too small to fight in. The Vorith apparently knew this, which was probably why they'd sent 2 of their forward scouts to guard the thing. The scouts weren't armed the way human soldiers were armed. They didn't carry weapons in the traditional sense. What they carried were resonance amplifiers, handheld versions of the same technology as the emitter, capable of projecting a focused beam of the signal at close range. Getting hit by one at close range didn't kill you. It just made you feel, with total and crushing certainty, that nothing you were doing mattered, and that you had probably never been a person who was capable of making things matter. The first scout hit her with it in the access corridor. He felt it land, that same withdrawal, that same pulling back of the tide, and for 2 or 3 seconds she was back on the crate in the market square, back in her bunk at 0300, back in the sensor, staring at a diagnostic she couldn't make herself begin. The weight left, the wire between knowing and feeling went dead, and then something else happened. She thought about Kyla. She thought about the girl sitting on the crate in the storage bay with her knees pulled to her chest, saying, my parents are fighting again, in that flat, effectless tone. And she thought about what it would mean if she stayed down on the floor of this access corridor. She thought about Coates, who was somewhere behind her in the darkness doing the same math she was doing. And she thought about all the people in the settlement below the granite hills who had been, breathing this signal for 3 weeks and didn't know it, and were fighting with their families and lying awake in the dark and staring at the things they'd built and feeling nothing. The feeling didn't come back all the way. That was the honest truth. The signal was still there, still working, still cutting the wire. But a wire she had found doesn't have to carry the full current. A wire just has to carry enough. She got up off the floor. Scout adjusted to fire again, and she moved inside the cone of the amplifier and hit the device with the butt of her sidearm. Not the scout, the device, because she'd been briefed on Vorith biology, and she knew that the scouts themselves were not the enemy. They were forward-deployed signal support units, biological yes, autonomous yes, but also running on the same principle as the emitter. They were infrastructure. They were there to maintain an atmosphere, and you don't win a war against an atmosphere by fighting the weather. You find the machine that makes it. The second scout understood what she was doing faster than the first one. It put itself between her and the emitter and projected the signal at maximum amplitude, and she felt it hit her like a pressure wave, and she thought very clearly, I know what this is. I know what you're doing. I know the wire isn't actually cut, you're just jamming it. And I know. I know from 6 weeks and 3 postings and 1 night on Tarthos Tafi when I thought I wasn't going to make it through to morning, that jam doesn't mean broken. She kept moving. The emitter was a Vorith Type 7 signal projector, roughly the size and shape of a large trunk, covered in the bioluminescent filaments that the Vorith used instead of indicator lights. It was also, like all Type 7 projectors, designed with one specific vulnerability. Its resonance chamber was external. The Vorith hadn't bothered to armor it because it had never occurred to them that anything would get this close to it and still be functional. It occurred to Mira. Planted the breaching charge at the base of the resonance chamber, pulled the pin, looked at the emitter for a moment the way you look at something that has been in your house too long and has started to feel like furniture. Your faith is futile, the surviving scout said in the clipped, frequency-shifted phonemes that Vorith used for human speech. It was quoting something. They always quoted something in the briefings. Some phrase from the signal protocols. I doubt that, Mira said. She moved back up the corridor. The charge went off 17 seconds later. A flat, contained crack, more pressure than sound in the confined space, and she felt the signal stop the way you feel a sound stop that you'd been hearing so long you'd stopped hearing it. The room got quieter. The tide came back. She sat down in the corridor with her back against the wall and breathed for a while. Coates found her there. He sat down next to her with the easy economy of motion that suggested he'd done this before. Sat down next to someone in a corridor after something difficult. And he didn't say anything for a long time. He had a flask, he offered it, she took it. It was bad coffee, too hot, and it tasted like the best thing she'd ever put in her mouth. Emitters down, he said. I know. Scouts withdrew. Type 7 deployment doctrine. Once the emitter goes down, the forward units pull back. He accepted the flask back. You okay? She thought about it. Not the diplomatic version of thinking about it, but the actual version, which took a moment and involved sitting with some discomfort. Not all the way, she said. No, but enough. He nodded. This was the thing about Coates. He never tried to round up. He never told you that you were fine when you weren't, or that it would be easy when it wouldn't. He just accepted the honest assessment and factored it into his planning, which was, she had come to understand over 4 postings and 1 court-martial, a very specific and undervalued form of respect. Kyla's parents, she said. Signals down, they'll start to stabilize, might take a few days. He paused. Might need some help, I'll talk to them. I know you will. She got up. It wasn't graceful, but it was thorough. The full commitment of getting up, both feet under her, the decision made. He walked back up through the access corridor, and through the lower level and up the stairs to where Kyla was still sitting on the crate in the storage bay, knees still to her chest, though she had moved slightly, angled toward the door as if she'd been listening. It's done, Mira said. Kyla looked at her. Do you feel different? Mira thought about this honestly. That's not very reassuring, I know. She sat down on the crate again, the same crate, same position, the geometry of the conversation restarting from the same place. The signal's gone. Oh, the feeling won't come back all at once. But it'll come back, and in the meantime, she paused. In the meantime, you act on what you know. Even when it doesn't feel like it connects to anything. Even when the wire's dead, you act on what you know and you trust that the feeling is still there somewhere, waiting for the interference to clear. Kyla was quiet for a while. Then, how do you know it's still there, the feeling? Because I've been through interference before, Mira said. And every time when it clears, the things I thought I'd lost were still there. A little worn, a little marked up, but there. She looked at the girl. Signal's very good at making you feel like you've forgotten something. But you can't forget yourself entirely. It's too big. There's too much of you. Kyla didn't answer. But some of the tension went out of her shoulders. A small adjustment. Barely visible. The kind of shift that doesn't look like anything from the outside, but from the inside feels like setting something down. Outside through the walls, the rust-colored hills of Duran's moon held the last thin light of the system's sun. Somewhere below them, in the settlement, a signal that had been running for 3 weeks and 6 days had gone silent. And the particular quality of that silence was not emptiness but the absence of noise. The return of something that had always been there, waiting for the frequency to clear. Coates appeared in the doorway. He had 2 cups of the terrible coffee. He offered one to Kyla. He took it. Please, she said. He raised an eyebrow. My mom always says you should say please, she said. Even if no one's making you. Your mom, Coates said, settling himself against the doorframe with the ease of a man who has found over a long career that doorframes are underrated. Sounds like someone worth listening to. Mira wrapped both hands around her cup and looked out through the narrow window at the hills. Tomorrow there would be a full team sweep of the lower levels. Tomorrow there would be after-action reports and signal clearance protocols, and a conversation with Vorath Territorial Command that would be conducted through intermediaries and would accomplish nothing and was required anyway. Tomorrow the people in the settlement would wake up and the arguments would be quieter and the grief would start to have causes again and the long, slow work of reconnecting would begin. The work that was never fast, that didn't happen all at once, that looked from the outside like nothing was happening but from the inside felt like thawing. But that was tomorrow. Tonight. 3 people in a room, the terrible coffee, the hills turning dark outside the window. It was enough. It had always been enough. It would have to be enough. And the thing about enough, the thing the signal never understood, that the Vorath had never factored into any of their modeling, that 800 years of studying human psychology had somehow failed to teach them, was that humans had always been remarkable at finding it. Not the perfect, not the complete. Not the whole unbroken frequency with no interference and all the signals clear, just enough. Just the wire carrying just enough current. Someone in a corridor sitting up off the floor and deciding to keep moving. It wasn't glory. It was something harder than glory, and something that lasted longer. Mira drank her coffee and watched the dark come in over the hills and did not stop feeling the places where the signal had been, the tender absences it had left behind, the faint wrongness of a room. After the noises stopped, she felt all of it and she stayed.